Welcome. We're going to have a chat this evening with Dr. Richie Cohen, and we're talking about why heart health is a feminist issue. Dr. Richie Cohen is a lecturer at LJMU University in Liverpool. I feel like I overused the U then, because obviously the U stands for university, right? And is world renowned for heart health research, cardiovascular disease research, muscle health, healthy aging, salsa dancing, so many talents. So it's going to be a very good conversation this evening. If you have any questions as we're talking, please put anything into the chat and we'll make sure that we come to them in the Q&A at the end. So even if you can't stick around for the full chat, please pop your questions in anyway. And this is being recorded, so I'll make sure that you can get a copy of that later on. So Richie, did I miss anything? Do you want to reintroduce yourself a little bit more professionally, or I don't know if you liked my little jaunty intro.
I just, for anybody who might not be completely familiar, the reason it's so weird is because Georgia never calls me Dr. Richie Kerwin, and I'm in the living room and she's in the office, literally one room away from here. So
two rooms.
Well, there's one room in between, so that's why it's weird. Hello.
But you're happy with the introduction?
Okay. Yeah, fine, yeah.
My goodness. Okay, let's crack on then. So yeah, it's February, it's like the month of love, and heart health is something that comes up for me when I think of February. It's really important, and I think this conversation just doesn't really get had enough, loudly enough, or with enough nuance as well. And so what I kind of want to cover this evening is something that impacts women, particularly later in life, midlife, menopause, postmenopause, that just doesn't really get enough airtime, because so much, and I am going to go patriarchy, so if you need to rein me in, don't bother, because you're a man. But yeah, when we're thinking about like health and healthy aging, it's still, you should look young, or you should try and age with grace, and you should still be the same size that you were when you were 18. And there's a lot of pressure on women throughout life to look a certain way. And so the lens I'm coming at this with is, diet culture, and the clients that I work with struggle a lot with things like food rules and actually honoring their health in a way that is very meaningful for them, lifelong, because of yo-yo dieting getting in the way, restrictive food rules, good and bad eating, and also weight loss and weight regain kind of over the years and over the decades as well. So as a bit of a long intro, can you take us through the impacts on cardiovascular health of yo-yo dieting? Because we know for postmenopausal women, cardiovascular disease is the biggest killer, more so than, breast cancer, which quite rightly gets a lot of airtime, but we're overlooking something that kind of gets brushed off as a bit of a man's problem, even though we've got the same kind of risk in midlife.
Yeah, I suppose just before kind of getting into that, it's just worth mentioning the little difference between men and women in terms of cardiovascular risk. And men generally develop like heart disease about a decade earlier than women. Mm-hmm. And to kind of just around 55, 60, that's when men start seeing like the outcomes of heart disease, which are things like heart attacks.
It's not a competition between men and women, just because they get there first.
But if it were a competition, we'd be winning.
Okay.
Dropping like flies a little bit sooner. But the reason for that is women seem to be protected from an earlier age because of estrogen. It seems to have a number of different effects on different aspects of cardiovascular disease. And it keeps women's cardiovascular system healthier compared to men of the same age. But then, obviously, along comes menopause. You get massive fluctuations in estrogen first, and then massive drops in estrogen for the rest of life. And what happens then is women's physiology starts to become a bit more like men's. And unfortunately, that's when women start experiencing the effects of heart disease. And it is the number one killer in postmenopausal women. So if we kind of get back then to the yo-yo dieting side of things, what is yo-yo dieting? It's like, you lose weight and then you regain that weight back, and you go through cycles of that.
And typically you regain a bit more weight each time.
Very, very much so. And one of the interesting things about yo-yo dieting is, if you look at yo-yo dieting in the general population, and if we think about it, the general population are people, they'll go on a diet, whatever type of diet it might be. It'll usually be some sort of a fad diet potentially, but it'll be a low calorie diet. There's oftentimes not exercise on top of that. So when they lose weight, and this is, I think this is actually something topical now, because people are talking about it with GLP-1 drugs. Yeah. When people lose weight without doing exercise, regardless of how you lose that weight, if you're using a GLP-1 or not, you don't just lose body fat. You actually lose a very, very decent proportion of that weight as muscle. So the muscle that you have in your body, and muscle is, like, Georgia, you're probably sick of hearing me talk about this, but it's just so important for our metabolic health. So you lose a little bit of muscle, people lose weight, and then there's this regain cycle, like you said. And people will oftentimes, when they're regaining, it's because there's been this really long period of restriction, and then suddenly there's this long period of kind of overeating, where people overconsume food, they put on a lot of weight, but they don't regain that muscle back necessarily. They get some of it back, but not all of it. So what you see actually is, over time, people are losing a little bit of muscle and they're putting on more body fat. So you've got this really, really poor body composition. And
yeah, it's a complete change in body composition, isn't it? So we actually go from, not in everybody, but what could have been a slightly healthier body composition initially, and actually increasingly worse health the more this kind of yo-yo dieting cycle is repeated.
And what's worse then is post-menopause, because women don't have that beneficial effect of estrogen, you get changes in the distribution of that body fat. So men, generally, we tend to accumulate weight around our midsection, around our stomachs. And we know that metabolically, that's not particularly good. It's associated with, things like poor blood lipids, so things like cholesterol. It's associated with poor blood glucose control, so things like diabetes, pre-diabetes. And women, again.
Sorry, just as we're going through this as well, if anyone has any questions around this, like, feel free to put it in the chat, because it's sometimes we're using words or phrases that you might be like, I hear it a lot, but I just want to double check on something. So feel free, if we are chatting about something that you think, okay, can I just clarify, pop it in there and we'll make sure we come to it.
Yeah, and so men put on weight like that, but women tend to put on weight around their hips and around their bum. And we know that that's actually a healthier way of holding on to weight, because it's associated with better markers of health, like better markers of your blood glucose control and things like that. But post-menopause, the estrogen isn't able to do that anymore. And women start actually, and a lot of women notice this, is that they say, oh, the weight is going on in different places where it didn't go on before. And that means it's usually going on around the midsection, around the stomach. And that's not particularly metabolically healthy. But the big thing with muscle is it's such a metabolically active tissue in our body. What it does is it helps us with glucose control. So whenever we eat some carbohydrates, that gets digested into glucose, goes into our bloodstream. Normally our blood glucose will go up for a second, but what will happen is our body will send that to our muscles, like actually into our muscles, where it gets turned into glycogen to store, and that helps us bring our blood glucose down. And that really, really helps us to look after our glucose levels. And that's why, being physically fit and having a decent level of muscle is really, really important for managing your glucose. But if you're gradually losing muscle over time from chronic yo-yo dieting, you're losing that kind of that buffer that helps protect you from those glucose excursions over time. So that's one of the big things that happen. And then that leads to other things like high triglycerides, high blood pressure, which has a major impact on heart disease in the future. And then other dietary choices can lead to increases in cholesterol as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it's impacting every system in the body when we are thinking about yo-yo dieting. And then when we layer in the changes that we see in that menopause transition as well, with, like you said, reduced estrogen, the way that impacts our kind of protection of heart health and also muscle health, and how that's almost a bit of a cycle between the two of them as well. Yeah, we end up with this kind of perfect storm of, it's time that, yeah, we unpick that a little bit, I think. And what I see very often is women who have been dieting not just for years but decades. So, you know, for some of the people that I work with, they may have even been put on a diet when they were, you know, pre-teen by parents, but they more than likely started at least in their teens or 20s. And by the time we're working together in, you know, 40s, 50s and 60s, that's a long time of on and off dieting. And the diet period itself might last only a few weeks or a few months. And then kind of the relaxation period is, you know, maybe months or even years before they kind of go again. And each time they diet, there is the, okay, this time I really mean it. This time I'm going to rein it in. I'm going to try harder. And that can look like developing different kind of food rules and food fears depending on the kind of diet they've done. So it might be classic macros, which is kind of early 2000s, you know, sort of like tracking and having a calorie target and not necessarily health focused, like perhaps there's a protein focus there. It might be keto, you know, cutting out certain foods. It might be that, you know, you're not supposed to eat after a certain time, or you're only supposed to eat within a certain window. Lots of, you know, shoulds and shouldn'ts that can kind of come on board with that. And over time, like what I see in women is this, I don't even know what to eat anymore. Like I literally just don't know what to eat. They don't know what's like quote unquote good or bad. But more than that, when they come to me, they're sick and tired of dieting, but they still also have weight loss goals, particularly because of the, you know, physical changes that happen during menopause. So they kind of feel like they're torn of like, I want to diet, but also I'm kind of sick of dieting, but it's not dieting itself that I want, it's the changes that I want to see. And we can kind of see that this, it feels really sticky then when they try to honor any kind of goal. So whether it's honoring a weight loss and fat loss goal, or it's simply, I just want to be healthy because I'm really aware of things like my, you know, my blood labs are coming back and I've got high cholesterol, I've got high glucose levels, that when we're then kind of starting to talk about improving diet quality, one, it can feel super scary because any kind of change can feel like a restriction. But then the second issue that we have a lot of the time is they really fear heart healthy foods. So things like, you know, nuts, healthy oils like olive oil, because typically they're more energy dense, so higher in calories, like per gram, they're really afraid of eating them. And so again, they have a conflicting thing where they desperately want to improve their health, and at the same time, they're absolutely terrified of the foods that they need to be including more of. And is that something that you see a lot, like in your research when you're kind of working with people with cardiovascular disease, for example?
So when I did my PhD, I had to create a recipe book for participants that I was going to have in a study to get them to follow a Mediterranean style diet. And one of the big aspects of the Mediterranean style diet, as you know, is getting a lot of olive oil into your diet. Mm-hmm. And as a minimum, we were looking for 4 tablespoons of olive oil a day. And one comment that we consistently got was that we were using a lot of oil in the recipes. Okay, and we had to, because that was kind of like just how the diet goes, the Mediterranean diet. And, you know, a lot of people were uncomfortable with it. And I can understand that. Like, I don't add a huge amount of oil when I'm cooking. And if you do come from a very restrictive diet history, where in your past it's all been about restriction, don't have too much fat, don't have too much carbs, whatever. Suddenly, if you're being encouraged to eat more fat, you can stop. Like, and you're like, should I be doing this? Everything before this has told me I shouldn't be adding this. What do I do? And it causes people to just, it's almost like a rabbit in the headlights kind of effect.
Yeah, you feel that kind of resistance, and we've all been there. Like, I can appreciate that feeling as well. I've come out of diet culture myself and tried to eat more calories and thought, oh my goodness, your brain kind of spirals with what's going to happen. But I think, this is the bit that just doesn't get spoken about. Like the average kind of diet that somebody gets put on. Okay, tell me about the kind of diet that you typically see in your clients when you start working with them versus what you work towards with them, because I think that'll be a really nice way of seeing that difference, because a lot of people will come to you having dieted, whether they're in a diet phase or not when they begin.
Yeah, there's a couple of different types. One, I suppose one that I see is you'll see the carb phobic side, which is, people will have very, very few carbohydrates in their diet, very, very few fruits. They will try to keep their diet relatively healthy, but you just don't see a huge amount of fruit and vegetables. Like it's a really common issue. I think, and well that I eat a lot of veg, probably more than you'd like me to eat. And it can be hard for people to increase that because they're not used to it. But yeah, there's definitely a bit of a phobia around carbohydrates. But then you see the phobia around fat as well. So a lot of people eating low-fat products and kind of avoiding things that we traditionally see as being high-fat. So things like nuts, for example, like, which is a big one, or, being very, very cautious of avocado. It really depends on kind of what particular aspect of diet culture somebody was previously in. So like I see people who've been low carb for a long time. I see people who've been low fat for a long time. You even see, like the the paleo diet people as well, like, who are, avoiding anything that's from the modern generation. So
I too had its day as well. Like I don't think it's as big now as it was, but 5-2 was kind of you just fast for 2 days a week, and then in those other 5 days it was almost like a free-for-all. It was like, you can eat whatever you want. And so health wasn't really a focus, but people would still lose weight because, for 2 days a week, they were, on very, very low calories. But because you're so hungry, it means those other days you're not thinking, oh, just really fancy a salad and some fruit. You want those high energy foods because your body is kind of asking to have some energy so that you can actually function and train and think clearly when you're at work as well.
And along with the 5-2, a lot of intermittent fasting people as well.
I think it's probably going to have a comeback at some point with like the GLP-1 change in culture as well, but at the moment I don't hear too much about like the 5-2 and the intermittent fasting, but it was huge, and that was kind of a like no actual food itself matters, so kind of nice. It was a bit of neutrality, but again, it didn't really support people in making changes that worked for them. So if we're kind of thinking about the average UK diet, so it's relatively low in fruit and vegetables, even though I will say most people will come to me saying, I eat very healthy, I eat lots of fruit and vegetables. When we actually look at their intake, it is under the recommended amount of fiber. So we often overestimate how many, I don't want to say good foods, but kind of like healthy foods that we're getting, and underestimate the rest. That's what I typically see anyway. But when we're thinking about, the average diet of a chronic dieter, let's say in the UK, who is kind of in perimenopause and thinking, actually, when I've been to the doctors, my bloods have come back and there are things that I need to improve, but I'm really, really kind of afraid of changing my diet in any way, because it's about control and feeling good in my body and feeling like, I am honoring the goals that I have, and they feel like a little bit maybe conflicted. What does the research specifically say around women in midlife in terms of like the biggest change they could make for their health?
It's funny with so I'm a nutritionist, And everybody automatically assumes the first thing I'm going to say is that people should be eating this, that, or the other. I would say with the majority of people, people need to really, really get control of their exercise and make it into a regular habit, because as we were kind of talking about earlier with the loss of muscle, exercise is the number one thing that you can do for muscle. And like I give lectures on sarcopenia and muscle loss here, and it's always the exact same thing. Despite the fact that I'm a nutritionist, and despite the fact that we're always talking about things like protein and supplements and all of these things that can help you with muscle, the number one thing that people can do is to exercise more regularly, and specifically to get some resistance exercise, some form of strength exercise in there, and make that a regular occurrence. And the reason I'm kind of saying that with women is because generally women have a much better diet than men do. Even if some of your clients might have bad diets, I promise you a lot of men of similar ages have absolutely awful diets, unfortunately. But then, yeah, I think we can get into some of the details on the diet stuff then as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. Obviously, personal training background, but I think if I was to kind of sum it up in a sentence, the most heart protective thing a woman could do would be to break that binge restrict cycle, and that's easier said than done. But yes, exactly. And that, I think also just kind of framing it that this doesn't mean giving up on health, and it doesn't mean giving up on body composition goals either. We can eat and train for health and body composition goals, and we can do that in a way that doesn't compromise long-term health, that doesn't lead to yo-yo dieting as well. So I just kind of want to get that in there first, before we kind of get into the nitty-gritties, because obviously that's what I help women to do, but it'd be good to get into the researchy, geeky, sciencey stuff. Go crazy. This is your green card now.
Okay, so if we talk about just the insulin resistance side of things, because this is something that happens with that loss of muscle, rebuilding that muscle. Okay, and I'm not talking about turning anybody into Arnold Schwarzenegger or anything like that. I'm just talking about, like, getting a healthy level of muscle where you feel comfortable, you're able to move. I think it's having bodily freedom and maintaining bodily freedom, because that's something that's really, really important. People don't think of it. Even, like young people definitely don't think about it, but even people like in their 50s or 60s don't think about it. You don't think about losing the ability to use your body until it happens. But it, as basically from our 30s onwards, we're all on a downward slope, losing muscle. So we need to hold on to we need to hold on to as much as we possibly can. All right. So exercise really, really helps with that. That helps with glucose control. That will help with blood pressure. That will help with maintaining healthy triglyceride levels and healthy levels of HDL. Okay, and all of those are absolutely important for maintaining our heart health. Because I suppose just to give an overview of how heart disease happens is, it's basically as soon as we're born, obviously our blood flows around in veins and arteries in our bodies. We have molecules in our blood called LDL. And these molecules carry cholesterol. And if we have a lot of that LDL cholesterol floating around in our blood over a long period of time, and in the addition of all of these other factors like high blood pressure and high blood glucose, it starts to build up on the walls of our arteries. And those artery walls then, because you've got this buildup on the inside of the artery walls and in our tubes, they start getting narrower and narrower, and that makes it harder for blood to flow around. And then eventually, and when I say eventually, I mean, like, this is something that starts when we're children, that continues throughout our adult lives, and usually doesn't start to actually manifest until somebody's in their 50s. So it takes decades. It's an incredibly slow process. So, like, obviously the best time to start is when you're young. The next best time to start is right now, with it. But the big thing that we can do with that is, like I said, mentioned blood glucose control, and maintaining healthy blood pressure, maintaining healthy metabolic health. But the other thing that we can do then is helping to bring down our LDL cholesterol. And there's a load of research into how that can be beneficial.
Tell us, Richie. Tell us.
So like it's incredibly well studied. You know, lowering our LDL cholesterol has a very, very profound effect on reducing our long-term risk. And the beautiful thing about it is, like, we have various different types of studies ranging from, let's say, something along the lines of 3 to 5 years. And those are studies where we can actually give people drugs that lower their cholesterol and look at, you know, what's the risk of developing heart disease a few years later. But we can have studies where we follow people and we look at their levels of cholesterol at the start and throughout, and then we can monitor changes over 12 years, okay, a longer period of time. And then we've also got genetic studies where we can look at people who have genetically lower or higher cholesterol, and we can follow them over the course of their entire life, so like 50 years or something like that. And what's beautiful about all these studies, they all show the same thing, that if you lower cholesterol, if you lower it over a short period of time, you reduce the risk. But if you lower it over a long period of time, you really reduce the risk. So we know that it's lowering people's LDL cholesterol is a really, really potent way of reducing the risk of heart disease. It kind of slows down that narrowing of the arteries that we were speaking about.
So it's beneficial to kind of go in short term, but also if you can continue to do it rather than on and off, then we're going to see better benefits for the rest of our lives. Absolutely.
One thing people often hear is, like, you hear people who, like, for some reason don't want to believe in cholesterol. They'll say that, like, oh, if you statins, this is a common drug for reducing cholesterol. People say, oh, the statins only reduce, they only save like 1 in 50 lives over the course of 3 years. And yeah, that's over the course of 3 years. But hopefully we would like to live a little bit longer than 3 years. And maybe we'd like to live for maybe 10 years, or maybe we'd like to live for another 20 years after we've taken a statin. And it's those long-term periods where you really start to see major effects happening. And then because of that, because we can see that lowering cholesterol has that profound effect, we have a lot of different studies that show the different effects of food on cholesterol. And then we can kind of say that, right, if we can use these different ways of reducing our cholesterol with our food, we can potentially have the same effect on reducing our risk of heart disease in the future too.
So let's go into those foods a little bit, because this is kind of where we cross over the most, isn't it? Kind of where we want to introduce these heart healthy foods to our regular diet. But then if we're feeling that resistance, because, you know, by midlife we've been restricted for that long and we have that fear around certain foods, we kind of want to bridge that gap. So take us through some of your favorites that you would genuinely recommend, as in, this is an effective cholesterol lowering heart healthy food that actually is, you know, delicious as well, because that's important.
Okay. So I think if we talk in terms of, like, let's say the most potent, and we'll work our way down to other things as well. So probably one of the most important things when it comes to reducing cholesterol is something that we call the polyunsaturated saturated fat ratio. Okay. And what that means is, so we know there's a few different types of fat. There's saturated fats and polyunsaturated. Saturated fats are generally hard fats at room temperature. So things like butter, the type of fats that we get in meat and other dairy products, coconut oil and palm fat are all saturated fats as well, and even some of the fats in chocolate. So these fats, if you have them in excess, that means you're getting a lot of saturated fat. You're kind of skewing that ratio, and that leads to higher levels of cholesterol. So you can reduce those fats by reducing those foods a little bit, not eliminating them, because, like, you don't need to. You just need to reduce the total quantity, and that'll reduce your saturated fat. But the other side of that is we need to increase the amount of polyunsaturated fats in our diet. So polyunsaturated fats are the type of fats that we get in certain nuts, seeds, and vegetable oils. So, for example, walnuts are a spectacular source of polyunsaturated fats, as are things like sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, even flax seeds. They're all really, really good sources of these polyunsaturated fats. And having that better ratio, getting more of those into your diet is a really good idea. So you can get more seeds, you can get more nuts into your diet because they've got monounsaturated fats. They don't have as strong effect as the polyunsaturates that I mentioned, but good sources of monounsaturated fats include things like olive oil, avocados, olives themselves, almonds, for example. So getting more of those good fats into your diet and reducing some of those saturated fats actually has a really, really strong effect on lowering somebody's LDL cholesterol levels.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point because, you said it's not just about reducing the saturated fat, which, people can get on board with when they're dieting and they think, yes, I can, cut stuff out. But then when we actually have to replace them with something else that's equally as energy dense, that can feel really scary when we're kind of thinking about body composition. So you've touched on resistance training, but let's say we're really feeling resistance to increasing unsaturated fats because of the fear around energy intake and fats in particular, because we've also got body composition goals. How would you frame that? Lucy's also saying, agreeing with this, because fats can feel really scary with high calories. So exactly with that, how would you support someone in honoring body composition goals and at the same time heart health?
Yeah. And I completely get it because I come from that kind of diet culture background as well. So like adding something that I know is like incredibly high in calories into my diet can feel a little bit scary at first.
Yeah, taking out can feel logical, but putting something in can feel almost like this is the exact opposite of what I want to do right now. Yeah. Even if it's good for my health, it can feel really scary.
I suppose one way of thinking it is like, first off, what we said is we're replacing one with the other. So if you have a considerable source of those saturated fats in your diet, you're reducing and replacing some of those with another fat. So you're basically just evening that out. Okay, so that's one way of thinking of it. Another thing that I really like to think of with food is like, and we've discussed this plenty before, but it's having an inclusive mindset around nutrition. And by that, I mean, it's like, think of the things, instead of thinking of the things that you need to avoid, which is what we call an exclusive mindset. You have, I need to exclude this from my diet, and I need to exclude this. I can't have these, I can't, blah, blah, blah. You think of things, I'm going to have these because I know that these things that I'm having are really, really beneficial for me. And they're giving me, they're improving my health by having them. And that's why when I'm encouraging people to get more of these fats into their diet, one thing that I like to do is really, really encourage that they get them from whole food sources. And what I mean by that is, so instead of like just getting a bottle of like vegetable oil and like, taking shots of it in the morning or something like that.
Which some people do with olive oil. They do shot the olive oil.
Yeah, they do.
I'd rather eat the olives, I would.
I'd rather have the bar of chocolate. But you like getting the nuts and seeds into your diet can be a really, really good thing, because one, you're not just getting the oil then, you're also getting a whole host of other things. You're getting the protein that they have in those nuts and seeds. You're getting the fiber that they have in those nuts and seeds. And hopefully we'll get onto fiber a little bit in a moment. You get all of the phytonutrients that those nuts and seeds contain. And you also get the added satiety of having those whole foods. So what you're having then is that you're having these foods that are providing you with those essential fats, but they're also helping you feel nice and full. So hopefully, like, you're going from one meal to the next without feeling like you're starving and feeling like, all right, God, if I don't eat something soon, I'm going to rob a bakery or something,
Oh, we've all been there.
Oh, yeah, really.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I actually wanted to touch on what you said there with like the fats contributing to satiety, but actually the fats in themselves contribute to satiety because they take longer to empty from our stomachs. So it slows down our digestion, and whatever we've eaten sticks around a little bit longer. So we can eat the same meal, but with the addition of some fats, actually feel more satisfied. And a lot of the work that I do with my clients is around finding what is, satisfying for you. Some people do actually feel better on a slightly higher carbohydrate diet. I've had so many clients message me before and they're like, oh my God, just adding in some, nuts and seeds to my stir fry or my porridge. So like, I feel really like satisfied afterwards, but genuinely for the next few hours, they're not, hunting through the cupboards for snacks. They're not side-eyeing the vending machine. They make it through to the next meal really comfortable. And this is kind of where we can talk a bit more about how this can impact things like body composition as well, because even though we may be increasing maybe the calorie content of a meal by these additions, we're also going to be reducing sort of impromptu snacking and grazing throughout the afternoon, because we're not looking for that little something to kind of top us up. We don't rely on chocolate bars as much when our food has been very delicious and very filling. We might eat it for pleasure, but it's not going to be like you said, I just have to eat something because I'm so hungry right now. And when we do feel like that, we always look for the higher energy foods, because we're never thinking like, I'm starving, I could just go for some stir-fried broccoli. I'm starving, I want something quick, carb, sugar, kind of rich, fat-rich foods. Kind of lost my trail of thought there. It was around satiety, I think you mentioned with the fiber. That was it, with the seeds.
One thing I do with my own clients is that I really, really try to ensure that their main meals are really, really filling meals. Okay, because I want them to actually feel full, because a lot of people coming from diet culture are just coming from a place where they're having these tiny little meals which they've been trying to calorie control and make incredibly, they're not intentionally making them small, but they made them small just because of the practices that they've been using for designing their meals. But like I'll encourage my my clients to, they get loads of, let's say, plenty of whole grains. They'll get plenty of fruit and vegetables into a meal. They'll have a source of fat. They'll have loads and loads of protein. So they're getting loads of fiber. They're getting food volume. And I'm really trying to encourage them to make them nice, because if you come out of a meal satisfied and actually full, it's going to carry you through to your next meal, or it's going to discourage snacking. And snacking, like we all know, it can get out of hand. There's nothing wrong with having a snack every now and then, but when it's something that's like, oh my God, I need something or I'm going to explode, that's not good. And a lot of people kind of set themselves up for failure beforehand.
Exactly. And I think there's two things there, in that sometimes, people will tell me that they avoid the feeling of fullness because it feels like failure when they've got body composition goals, because it can feel like, well, if I'm full, I've eaten too much. So there's obviously kind of that layer there as well. But then there's also, you kind of said like having the small meals. I've had plenty of people send me their kind of typical diet, and what I actually see is that the majority of their energy is coming from snacks every day. So they might have like, I'm going to make up stupid numbers so it doesn't feel meaningful to anyone, but let's say they've got like a 100 calorie breakfast, a 100 calorie lunch, and a 100 calorie dinner, but then they've got 500 calories of snacks between breakfast and lunch, and like 1,000 calories of snacks between lunch and dinner. Or they're then not feeling hungry enough for their evening meal because they've grazed and grazed and grazed, and they've not really had the opportunity to feel their appetite kick in the evening as well. So I think when you're kind of talking about having really satisfying meals, there can be that fear of, if I'm feeling full, then, I've kind of failed my fat loss. That was too many F's in a row. But when we're thinking about making a meal very satisfying and how that, like you said, positively impacts the rest of your eating habits in between meals, you may well have a natural calorie reduction simply from not finding yourself kind of picking and grazing. Because I'm terrible for that, especially when, you work from home. If you haven't had a meal that really kind of felt good, it's so easy to keep popping back into the kitchen and nibbling at biscuits in between and not really realizing how much you've eaten between meals.
Is that where our biscuits have been going?
Well, if we have biscuits in the house, that would be my problem, but it's not, is it? We're an ingredients household, and it upsets my snack needs.
So that's the fat side of things. But then the next side, or the next, let's say, food thing that's really, really beneficial is fiber. And fiber, it's a really interesting way that it lowers cholesterol. Fiber actually binds in our digestive system. It binds to bile acids, and bile acids are things that our digestive system secretes to help us digest fats. It helps us to break down fats. And the interesting thing is that bile acids are actually made from cholesterol. And normally what happens is our bile acids get released, they help us break down food, and then they get reabsorbed and then back into our system, okay? And we have a balance. But if you eat a lot of fiber, particularly some soluble types of fiber, so things like psyllium and for anybody who's not familiar, psyllium is a type of a seed that has a husk that is very, very rich in this soluble fiber. And it's actually used in a lot of products that help people with constipation. So is it Senecot? Is that the, yeah, so there's a product called Senecot. I think you can get it in pharmacies in the UK. People take it for constipation. Basically, it has a load of this psyllium fiber in it, and it helps keep people more regular. But that fiber binds to those bile acids, holds onto them really tightly, and it actually takes them all the way through the digestive system and out the other end. So that means that your body wasn't able to recycle them, so your body has to use more of the cholesterol in your blood to turn it into those bile acids for the next time that you have a meal. And that way, we lower the level of cholesterol in your blood. So fiber has a really, really good effect. And what I would say with fiber is, I would encourage people to get fiber from as many different sources as possible, because there's lots and lots of different types of fiber. There's insoluble, soluble. But I would say to get more soluble fiber, things like beans, peas, and lentils, so your legumes, they're fantastic sources of fiber in general, but they've got lots and lots of soluble fiber. There's vegetables like Brussels sprouts, an amazing source of soluble fiber. Okra, a vegetable not very commonly eaten in the UK, but very good source of soluble fiber, as are eggplants or aubergines. Really, really good sources. But I would encourage people to get as much fiber as they can from fruits and vegetables, and just encouraging fruit and vegetables. And if they want a little bit of an extra kick, I would say, obviously, nuts and seeds, and that's where you get that double whammy that I mentioned earlier for getting the oils, and you get the fiber. But if you want that extra kick, you can actually take psyllium fiber as well, and just kind of add that to, you can add it to smoothies, you can add it to yogurts, you can do what we do, and we make a psyllium smoothie
jelly.
pudding jelly in the evenings, and that can be really, really useful too.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I would say as well, with specifically my clients in midlife and clients with PCOS, when they've had more soluble fiber, but in particular things like psyllium, they've noticed quite a reduction in bloating as well. And I'm kind of thinking more around bloating from like hormonal causes, so like the fluctuations in estrogen. A lot of the discomfort in midlife and with PCOS as well can be the hormonal bloating. So as we're improving diet quality and, kind of sneaking fruit and vegetables and unsaturated fats into the diet, which obviously are anti-inflammatory as well, there is like a noticeable difference when we introduce things like psyllium in how they feel in the morning, their bowel movements, and how comfortable they feel throughout the day. And as much as it sounds like that's quite a small thing, actually it's very significant, because a lot of what drives this kind of restrictive eating habits can be how we feel in our body, particularly as we're kind of moving through menopause transition as well. So definitely worth, for many reasons, popping those in. Sorry, Lucy asked a question and I missed it. She has asked, how does it work if I have bile acid malabsorption? Should it be more fiber or less?
So again, that's something that I'm not familiar with, so I wouldn't be willing to comment on it. But it is definitely something that, if you do work with a specialist on that, it would be worth just speaking with them and finding out what their thoughts are on it. But yeah, it's not something I'm familiar with, so I couldn't comment.
Yeah, same for me. Yeah, sorry, Lucy. Dietitian is going to be the one for that. Fab.
Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, when we're thinking about including, Dan has asked, what seeds are your top choices?
I'll be specific. I'm going to give 2 seeds and I'm going to give a nut.
Wait, you have to tell us why they're your favorites.
Yeah, why? Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not just going to throw them out there. So sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, and walnuts. There we go, 3. And the reason for that is, and this is just from looking at the available data, pumpkin seeds, actually I'm going to put almonds in there as well as number 4, and I'll speak about why. Almonds, I'll say first, is almonds have a huge amount of research behind them. Okay, and so the evidence for almonds helping to reduce cholesterol is actually really, really, really strong. And that likely comes from a number of different effects, like the monounsaturated fats that they have, the amount of fiber that they have, the polyphenols that they have in there. So almonds have a lot of evidence. Almonds, there's the Almond Board of California. They pay for a lot of research, so they, that's why we have a lot of evidence for almonds. But pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds are very, very high in linoleic acid. And linoleic acid is the main polyunsaturated fatty acid. It's an omega-6 polyunsaturated fat that has that effect on reducing cholesterol. So it does that by reducing, by increasing the number of LDL receptors on our liver that allows that LDL in our circulation to get taken up by the liver and recycled. So they're very, very high in that linoleic acid. And the same goes for walnuts as well, which have a lot of linoleic acid, which is unusual for nuts. Most nuts in general have a lot of monounsaturated fats, and then most seeds are higher in the polyunsaturated fats. But other good seeds to include would be chia seeds as well, and flax seeds. What I would say about chia and flax seeds is, because they're tiny little seeds, if you do have them, it's worth running them through a grinder or a blender, or buying them pre-ground or pre-milled first, so that you can actually absorb the fat that's in them. Because otherwise, and everybody who has used them will know this, otherwise if you eat them whole, they'll come out the other end completely intact, and you won't have absorbed any of the fat from them. You'll get some of the benefits of the fiber, but not the fats.
Bit of a waste of food. It's just straight in and straight out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so these are your favorites. I love that. I'm just too distracted by the chia seeds. Okay, yeah. So when we're thinking about like the impacts that diet culture has had on the ability sounds wrong, but sort of the willingness to eat in a heart healthy way, because we have been bombarded by food rules and shoulds and shouldn'ts, and what your body should look like or shouldn't look like, regardless of any kind of health condition. You don't need to eat low carb or eliminate gluten, if you're not celiac. But we take these on. I know lots of people that eat gluten-free just because they feel it's probably better for them. It helps cut certain foods out. Staying dairy-free because it cuts out a lot of good things, from pastries to chocolate to cheesecake to yogurts, all kinds. And we've talked about increasing fiber and increasing unsaturated fats. If there was, I almost kind of know the answer to this, but if there was like an ideal way for people to eat, specifically women in midlife, for health and for body composition, what would that look like if we're thinking about the things that we would include more of? So we've touched on fat and fiber.
So extra things that I would add in. I think that there is definitely a place for adding in more. So we all talk about protein, and protein is the golden boy of nutrition at the moment, although fiber is kind of hot on its heels.
Protein can do no wrong.
Yeah. I think making some changes for the type of protein that we use can also be really, really beneficial. And I'm very, very cautious about saying we should be eating more plant protein, because as soon as you say that, people will say, "Oh, I'm sick of this vegan crap. I'll say I'm not a vegan, but I still think that this is a really, really good point worth mentioning. And what I mean by getting more plant protein is, so we can think beans, peas, and beans, peas, and lentils. So our legumes. So getting more of those, because they have a fantastic source of fiber, like I said, but the protein that they contain as well also does have effects on reducing our cholesterol. And the protein that they contain and the fiber that they contain also are really, really potent. They have a really, really potent effect on keeping us feeling fuller for longer. So we want to encourage people to get more of this fiber and get more of this protein into their diet, because it's going to help them feeling full. not feel like that, they've had a meal and then it's like a few minutes later, like I'm hungry again. And that's kind of what we want to eat. And then if we get even a little bit more specific, we could say things like soy proteins in particular have a really, really strong effect on, of all the legumes, on reducing cholesterol as well. So that's things like tofu, tempeh, and even TVP, which is textured vegetable protein, which is a derivative of soy, are really, really good. But in the UK, most people, you say have some tofu, they're like, what the hell am I supposed to do with that?
White sponge.
Oh yeah, and it's not a white sponge that isn't even spongy. And I would say, like, find a few good recipes, like, because tofu needs a bit of help. But
Pinterest, get on Pinterest. You need the inspiration. Yeah.
But if you give tofu that bit of help, and it's really, really tasty. Like, so we cook quite a bit of tofu and tempeh. The air fryer gets a lot of work, like roasting it up. We covered in different spices. Corn, which is a type of mycoprotein, is another really, really good one as well. Fantastic source of protein, fantastic source of fiber. And you've got this protein which is helping you maintain your muscle mass, it's helping you feel fuller for longer, and it's also having that beneficial effect on your cholesterol levels too.
Yeah, corn's probably the closest to meat out of like the plant proteins. Donna has said, delighted I use sunflower and pumpkin seeds on salads and chia seeds in overnight oats, and she's going to get some psyllium, almonds and walnuts as well. Nice. Okay. And she also says, I'm working with a lady at the moment who is vegetarian, no fish, and she can't stomach some beans and finds tofu hard to digest. She also doesn't like protein yogurt. She has skimmed milk. Any ideas for options? Donna's mentioned tempeh, falafel, and a plant-based protein powder.
So this is a big case of experimentation. Like, you really want to try a few different things, but like knowing what options are available are really, really good. So for example, I'd recommend trying out some corn, just because corn is like really, really entry level protein. It's generally quite tasty. And you put it into like a well flavored sauce, and it's really, really good. The one thing I'll say is start with small amounts, and because this is a mistake that I see an awful lot of people making, and it's like they try to add a load of beans to their diet, or a load of soy, or a load of tempeh to their diet straight away, or even corn, and what happens is they all get a bit of a stomach upset, and the reason for that is they're just not used to the fiber content yet.
Do you remember that time you made? What was it you made now? It was TVP.
The TVP, yeah.
I literally thought I was going to die. Oh my God.
We did make a very, very large portion of that, and you
that
were
was
just
the
not
worst day of my life.
You were not ready for the amount of fiber that stuff has.
Oh, inhuman. No. Start slow always. Even with beans and legumes, like even a tablespoon mixed in with like a normal portion of rice can be sufficient to start with. TVP.
Build up, yeah. Like have a plan about it. Like, just say, this is how much we're going to use this week. The next week, or in 2 weeks' time, we're going to increase it by this much, and do it gradually. But it takes a bit of work, like to kind of train your digestive system. And like, I know it sounds weird saying train your digestive system. It is something that you can do. Like we talk about it in Liverpool John Moores all the time when we're talking about endurance athletes, because we can train our athletes to consume huge amounts of carbohydrate gels, like for running marathons or running ultra endurance events. But if you gave them that without the training, it wouldn't be pleasant for their digestive system at all.
And combining different things as well. Like, I'm a big fan of the chickpea pasta, the green pea pasta. There's a beetroot and is it red lentil, I think, is also an option. So again, you don't have to have a huge portion, but if you've got like some of that and some corn, or even kind of using it in your recipes. Like, I can't remember where I found it. It's probably Pinterest, because I'm addicted to Pinterest for recipes. But we'd used silken tofu to make a pasta sauce, and that was delicious. That was really good. So it can be sometimes just being a little bit inventive as well. Oh, okay. There's more. Donna says she hates corn, but probably has overloaded the ratios a little bit on vegetables, with a small amount of corn and beans. But yeah. Any thoughts on whole milk versus skimmed in terms of protein? I'm assuming for this one.
Well, they're the exact same amount of protein. What was the specific question? Says she has skim milk. Yeah, so like the skim milk is absolutely fine. Like, you know, in terms of protein, it's actually got a slightly higher protein content than regular milk, just because you've changed the ratios up there. That's good. And you've mentioned, I see plant protein powder there as well. So
yeah, I was going to say, can she take regular protein? Because if she's drinking milk, then a dairy, a whey protein would be fine. Is there a particular reason? Is it like a digestive thing for her? Because that would be quite handy, really, wouldn't it?
And one thing that's a bit of a development recently is these clear proteins. So clear whey came around first, and now you can get clear soy protein as well, and that makes it considerably easier to digest for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, especially if you don't like the kind of creamy, or some wheys can be a bit chalky as well, like, or quite thick, whereas the clear ones are so popular because it's like drinking juice. It's so nice. Yeah. Like, yeah, perfect. Yeah, okay, I think we have answered those questions. Good stuff. Yeah, so anyway, sorry, I've taken nearly an hour of your time, and I was thinking like 45 minutes would be fine. But thank you so much for that. I think that was a really helpful kind of discussion around the ins and outs, because it's so easy when we're trapped in diet culture, or we've come from a diet culture background, to really struggle with honoring health goals, even when it's super important to us, because there are so many thought patterns that get in the way, things that, you know, make us feel stuck. So if you're watching live or back on the replay, I hope you found this really helpful. And just to let you know, on Thursday, there's the live workshop on exactly this, all the things that get us stuck in our head, trying to figure out, like, I know what to eat, but why can't I do it? So if you want to come along, I will pop the link below this, and feel free to join in. Thank you so much, Richie. Anything you want to leave us with, or you're done?
Thanks for the chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you for watching, guys, and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.